at this time. There is, just want to introduce who they are first. Some of you know them, some of you don't know them. They've been here several times throughout the years. We have some newer people here. Jill can sit over here and Dave here. We're just going to sit together and we're going to have a conversation. I'll give this to you because you know when you're going to want to do these things. We don't look at clocks here, so don't look at your watch again.
I got 6 minutes.
Nope. We got as long as we need. Dave and Jill came to Cedar Rapids about 29, 30 years ago.
Pretty close.
Right? Okay. Graduates from,
Go ahead.
I got to say it in Iowa City. Graduates of Iowa State University. Oh, Cyclones. And we welcomed him into our family. We became friends. Dave might agree with this. He may not agree with this, and that's fine, but he is my best friend. We've laughed, we've cried, we've shared, we've worked together. We've gone to Dominican Republic together. We've had some good times together. They have 2 grown adult children. One's a doctor at Mayo in Rochester, Mayo Hospital, and the other is a doctor of anthropology. Is that right? Yesterday, in Jonathan's graduation, there was 1 doctorate of anthropology. I did notice that. I was paying attention. She lives in San Antonio. They're both married. They'll probably talk about them a little bit more as we go. In fact, the events that led us to sit here today revolve around one of their marriages. Dave has held many positions. From PR for the Cedar Rapids Fire Department to working with Lane County Health. His last one before he retired was Director of Health for our Johnson County here in Iowa City. And yes, now if you can think back and you can think about how I've said I've gotten information, he directed me and our church through COVID and what we could or maybe shouldn't do or recommendations from the man himself. Right or wrong. He was our guide on that, what we could do or should do. Jill is a teacher at Kennedy High School in Cedar Rapids. And if anyone likes hospice, ask Jill. She can tell you, I don't know if you can stump her on hospice. If you have a chance to go to their house in the summer, they have 2 or 3 acres in Cedar Rapids itself. Duratio kind of damaged a lot of her hospices, but she has about every kind of hospice back in their woods as you can think possible. And we've gone and dug hospice many times in their backyard to put in our yards. I believe the date was November 5. Am I right?
That's correct.
Lisa and I were down in Branson, Missouri with 2 other friends, having a little vacation for a few days and playing golf. And the time was probably about 7 or 8 o'clock. I could look at my phone and get the time stamp again. We were sitting in a music show, and actually was part Christian show too, kind of appropriate. And my phone started to text. My heart began to stop. The texts were vague, which were understandable. Information was limited. Pray for Dave, he needs help. He's been in an accident. Time of crisis. Don't remember the rest of that program, actually, or played golf the next day, and I don't remember much of that round of golf even. But Dave and Jill are here to share how God has been good to them. And we're going to have a kind of a conversation here back and forth a little bit today as they share their story of what the last 12 months has happened in their family.
So,
Green light.
green light. So I'm just going to start here quick, and then Jill's going to kind of do the first part of this. We're going to go back and forth a little bit, but I just wanted to thank Dale the opportunity to come down and share. It's still very raw for me, so I've got this cold that sometimes results in tears and sniffling nose, but it's not contagious, so it might come up today. But we hope not. It's, like I said, it's still very raw for me to talk about this, but Jill's just going to start off here and kind of set the stage a little bit for the events.
First of all, God is good. And sometimes He allows us to have experiences that when we look back and reflect on them, we are able to see how He is preparing us, how He is guiding, how He is laying the groundwork for the events that are to come. And so to kind of share that, we need to kind of start at the beginning of 2020. It was a rough year for a lot of people. But right at the first of the year, and we're not people that set New Year's resolutions at all, but we had decided that we wanted to really concentrate on our health. We'd been plant-based for a long time, and we have a lot of, on both sides of our family, genetic things, and we had decided we were going to really let God lead us and show us how we can continue to improve our health. And so even though we were plant-based, we were going to try and cut out more processed food, and we also decided to try to cut out gluten. And so we were working on that. We had a lot of aches and pains and joint issues. And you'll see how this kind of leads into it too. But we were seeing quite a bit of improvement. So that was January when we started that. And then I'm going to let Dave talk about the following months.
Yeah, so February of 2020, obviously, we started to hear about the COVID-19 around the world. And then in Seattle, Washington, were the first cases in the United States. And we had our first COVID case in Iowa, the first positive COVID case here in Johnson County in Iowa City on the 5th of March. And so that really began a very interesting, sometimes stressful, as a public health professional, leading kind of the initial response in Iowa. A lot of communication, obviously, with the Department of Public Health in Des Moines. But that really kind of kicked off a lot of stress, I should say, in one's daily life, and which really, again, that daily communication, the daily prayer, and the daily asking for God's guidance during those challenges, because no matter what decision we were making, there were people that were really upset no matter what the decision was. And so it was one of those times where, I literally every day on my commute into work asked God for guidance. Then moving on, in June, on Father's Day, we knew that Allison was going to be proposed to because Mark, her fiance, had called me and asked for permission to ask Allison to be his wife. So we knew that there was a bike ride. They're both very competitive athletes, and so Mark, our son-in-law, had planned for a early morning. They got up at 4 a.m., rode their bikes. They got on top of this butte down in Texas, and he proposed to her as the sun was coming up. So she called and shared that story with us. Shortly after that, Adam called us the very same day. He and his fiancée that he met at Loma Linda when he was in medical school out in California were on a backpacking trip, and he proposed to her without knowing that Allie had been proposed to the very same day. So for Jill and I, on Father's Day, it was such good news, and we really appreciated that. And also in 2020, I was scheduled to do 3 triathlons, which is also part of this story. And obviously COVID canceled all of those. So that was in the summer, and then turn it back over for August.
So after spring break, the Cedar Rapids School District did not return to school. And so I was looking forward to having classes in the fall. August 10th, I had gone into my classroom to set it up at Kennedy and got everything set up that morning, and Dave called and he said, there are 99-mile-an-hour winds that were reported in Marshalltown. You should probably get home and just kind of put some things away that were in the yard. So I took my time, and I got home, pulled in, didn't even pull the car into the garage 5 minutes before the storm hit, and it was rather terrifying. I stayed in the basement and could hear glass breaking, windows breaking, and the whole house was shaking. I was leaning against the door, and the door was rattling behind my back, and just was praying the whole time for safety and protection, and of course went up and saw the damage. We lost 55 trees at least in our timber, so we no longer have woods behind our house. Dave was able to make it home safely, but my high school was so damaged that we did not return. We weren't able to get back into the building until January 19th, which ended up being a blessing because I worked from home and was able to work in remote locations. Didn't necessarily have to be in Cedar Rapids. 1 week after the storm, I got a call from my brother that he was in the emergency room. My mom had fallen backwards down the stairs and hit her head on the corner of the trim that was at the base, and my dad found her unconscious laying in a pool of blood. And so miraculously she was okay, but I was able to go up then and spend a week with them, taking care of them. So was very, very happy that I didn't have to worry about school at that time because it had been canceled. But yet it was just still, I believe, preparing us and realizing again how good God is, that I have more time with my mom too, that I was able to be with them.
So in preparation for today, I was just planning on kind of sharing the story, and then I asked Dale how much time, if it was going to be, between Sabbath school and church. And he said, no, he goes, the story is the sermon. So I kind of had to do a little bit more preparation, or at least wanted to do a quick study in the Bible. And when you look at God's goodness, there are so many texts, and I just put a few up here on the screen. There's dozens of them, Old and New Testament. And they're just so comforting, knowing that God is good in everything. And we'll get into that a little bit more here. But to take us forward then to that day, November 5th. So go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, we had, just because things had been so stressful for Dave, we decided to go down a few days before our daughter's wedding and spend some time with them. Plus, it's a lot warmer in Texas. And so we spent Thursday morning just doing some wedding prep. It was going to be a very small wedding because of COVID, so we were just getting a few things ready for the reception, and decided to take bikes out and go on a bike ride by the trail that runs not far from their house. And so we did that about mid-afternoon, and we were going to do that before we had dinner for the evening.
So down in San Antonio, as Jill said, there's a trail. There's a really nicely paved asphalt trail that people run on and bike on. There's also mountain bike trails that go off of that throughout the Greenway. So this is just a quick picture of what one would look like. And actually, to the left there, this was, Mark and I had gone on a different trail that was a little bit steeper than this. And so the four of us were going on this, they call them rollers. They go up and they're just a little up and down and then back. And Allison said, well, let's just do it one more time before we go back. And so I did. And instead of going on the left where I did the first time, I went on the right. And you can see it's a little bit of designed as a jump. I didn't realize that until I got right up to that part that goes up. And I could see that it was a jump, and I knew I wasn't going fast enough to clear it, and I was going too fast to stop or turn. So right at the last second, I pulled up on the front tire, or on the handlebars, as hard as I could to try to get the front tire over that next ridge. And obviously, that didn't happen. So the front tire hit, and I remember everything so well. I didn't lose consciousness or anything, but I went straight head first like a torpedo into that mound of dirt. So there was no sliding, no skidding. It was just instant impact. And I landed on the front left part of my head, broke the helmet in 3 places, and I could instantly tell that I broke my neck. I was laying there. I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't move anything. I couldn't breathe. So I've played football and ridden motorcycles, and you know what it's like, Dale, to get the wind knocked out of you. You're trying to get that oxygen back in your lungs, and this was so much different. There was no feeling of trying to get my air. There was no panic. It was just completely calm, but I couldn't breathe. And I could hear Allison yelling, "Dad, Dad." And she came running over, and she was right there in front of me, and here comes the cold that I was talking about. She was yelling at me to breathe, and I did breathe.
Did you?
Anticipated this.
I did too.
You know, it was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. To me, it seemed like a long time. But I got that breath, and the first thing I asked her to do was to pray for me.
Take a breath for a second. I don't want to jump ahead in your story or behind your story a little bit. Where were you, Jill?
So when we were writing, before this happened, I had gotten the overwhelming urge to pray, and it was like nothing I'd ever felt before, to this extent. And so while we were writing, I was praying fervently to God for safety, and at the time I thought it was for me because I'm not quite as athletic as the rest of the group, and I have to admit I was probably more concerned for myself at that time, but I was praying for the safety of all of us. And when Allison had said, "Oh, let's just do this one more time," I had backed out, so I was waiting at the end of this pump trail, and I heard Ellie yelling, "Dad, Dad!" And so I dropped my bike, and I was close enough. I ran over there, and
You know, there are lessons in all of these things for all of us. I doubt very many here have ever been in a time of immediate life crisis. But you notice something what they both said. Jill was already praying because she felt the need to pray. She was listening, right? The first words out of Dave's mouth is what? Psalms 18:6 says, "In my distress I called upon the Lord and cried out to my God. He heard my voice from his temple, and my cry came before his ears." Are we living a life on a daily basis that in a time of crisis, the first thing we think is pray? Or is it, what can I do to fix the situation? What can I do to get out of whatever it is? And that's one of the first things I want us to learn from this story is our reliance, our dependence upon that good God is immediate and not secondary. It's the first, not the second thing that we do. Okay.
Thank you, Dale, for that. So I was laying there, I could hear Mark calling 911 and explaining to the dispatcher what was going on. Unfortunately, we were close to the trailhead, and it seemed like it wasn't long at all before I could hear the sirens and the ambulance and the people coming on the stretcher and getting me on the board and taking me to the hospital, which again, it was fairly close. It was in town. It was about a 10-minute ride in the ambulance. And so it seemed to go by very quickly for me from the time it happened until I was in the hospital. I know for Jill.
Not so much for me.
For
It
Jill,
seemed like an eternity before that ambulance got there.
Right. But, again, God's hand is in this entire scenario. The neurosurgeon that worked on me the next day was also a man of God, and convinced that made a difference as well. So Thursday, it happened Thursday afternoon, obviously. This is what my spine looks like. It broke C1, C2, C7, and the little, on C2 there's a dens. It's the bone that's like a thumb that goes up that C1 pivots around. That was just sheared off. C1 was in multiple pieces, C2 was in multiple pieces, and obviously this is the section that controls everything neurologically, that high up. This break was unique. It was 2 centimeters off to the right, which is quite a ways. The surgeon was explaining that most spinal cord injuries happen forward or back, either from diving into a pool or a vehicle accident where the spine is forward or back. This was left and right, which is a little bit more unique, but not extremely rare. And so there was a lot of potential complications with this that he explained to us very well. But Thursday, I kind of lose sense of time, but certainly MRIs and CAT scans, and I didn't sleep at all Thursday night. My blood pressure was too low for any pain meds, so I wasn't able to have any pain medication in the emergency department. And then Friday morning was prepping for surgery. And he had consulted with the individual that had trained him Thursday night on this particular break, and they wanted to try to see if they could pull my head and move it over before surgery while I was still conscious to be able to give them feedback on if I still had feeling in my fingers and toes. So they tried that Friday morning, and it wasn't budging. He pulled and tugged, and I still remember the excruciating pain from that. And he's like, okay, we're not going to do that. And so then they called Jill and the kids before I went into surgery on Friday.
Yeah, so going back to Thursday night, because of COVID, the hospital only would allow one visitor or one person back in the waiting room. So again, God was kind of working things out. Allie and Mark and I went to the emergency department, and I was allowed to go back into the trauma waiting room, which was very sterile, just chairs and nothing else. And I was sitting there and texting back and forth to Allie what was going on, which was nothing. Finally, someone came to the door, and because I knew nothing at that point, I wasn't able to ride with him to the hospital or anything. Someone came to the door and just asked me if he had a living will. And I said, yes. Then he left. And so Allie had texted me then if I knew anything, and this is where communication can not be so good. So I texted her back and I said, yeah, only one person, I don't know anything yet, but only one person came and asked if he had a living will. And she texted back, what is that? So I texted her back what a living will was and didn't hear anything. And so I went into the restroom, and when I came out, Allie and Mark were in the hallway outside of the trauma room, and Allie was crying hysterically. And then I got upset because I said, what happened? And it was just a big miscommunication. She thought that he had passed because of what I said about the living will, and then I thought she had found out something that I didn't. So anyway, the three of us got to be back in the waiting room together because of this whole fiasco. But the hospital was very good to us. They broke a lot of COVID violations so that we could be together.
Yeah, so this picture is just then Friday night after the surgery. So it was about an 8-hour surgery roughly, and that was Friday night. So still one day before the wedding on Sabbath on the 7th. So this is the 6th, and then they obviously broke the COVID rules for one visitor per day and allowed 10 individuals into the room with us. And the interesting and kind of funny story about this is that with the pandemic, when they were planning their wedding, initially they were thinking that they just wanted something very small and intimate with about 10 people. So they got their wishes of 10 people, very intimate group in the ICU room. So, it is what it is. I'm grateful that I was able to be a part of that, but not exactly what the father wants to dream about of walking your daughter down the hallway. So it is what it is. But again, it could have been worse. And again, we just thank God all the time.
And you could see the nurses were so wonderful. They made
streamers.
paper chains and they decorated the room for
Yes.
So it was nice.
So just real quickly, spent 4 days in ICU, and then 2 days when they transferred me to another room, and I was released after just 6 days. On the third day in the ICU room, I did talk to Dr. McGinnity, the neurosurgeon, just what the stats were for people with spinal cord injuries like the one that I had. And he goes, Dave, 50% don't make it to the hospital. They die before they get here, and the other 50% leave in a wheelchair from the neck down. They're paralyzed. And so it is truly a miracle. I don't want to diminish that aspect of this. God's hand was in this the entire time. The cost, when you go look for restaurants that has $1 sign, $2 signs on the cost of the food, I put 5 up there because, thank goodness for health insurance. It was extremely costly, but I'm here. I can walk, I can take care of myself, I can run, all of those things. So it's a true blessing. The rehab, I was fortunate that Allison and Mark were down there and that I was able to stay with them for 3 weeks, and I was able to get outside every day and go for a walk. It started just literally to the corner and back, maybe a half of a block. But it was sunny and it was warm, and I still remember being able to go outside every day, which I think was huge. We were able to come back to Cedar Rapids right before Thanksgiving and have that with Adam and Stephanie came down from Rochester. So it was nice to be back in Cedar Rapids, and then obviously the rehab started, the occupational and physical therapy both. I do remember specifically that collar. The surgeon said 9 to 12 weeks. It was 17 weeks. I don't know if he knew that to start with and just wanted to make it a little bit more palatable, but it was a long time with that collar. But I did pressure him and push him to see if I could get on my stationary bike down in the basement just to start doing something. And he said, if you have a safe way of getting on and getting off and you don't lean forward, you just sit straight up with the collar, you can do that. So I started on December 13th. I remember specifically I took a picture and sent to both kids just to let them know that the recovery was going well. And then cleared to start running in April, and started running. Painful at first, very, very slow, but it was on the road to recovery, and I think it certainly had a lot to do with these pictures coming up next. So obviously, all of those races that I had on the schedule in 2020 were canceled and postponed, but it really gave me motivation because I do love triathlon, and if you're not familiar with the sport, it's a swim, bike, run event, and there's different distances. And so the first Sunday in June, I did the Pigman, which, Dale, you're familiar with that race. It's out at Pleasant Creek, and it's a sprint, so it's short swim, short bike, short run. And then the Des Moines 70.3, which is just the half Ironman, which is a 1.2-mile swim, 56 bike, and a 13-mile run. And that upper right picture then is from Des Moines, and I was surprised. Allison flew up from San Antonio to watch me race. That was on Father's Day, and so that was great to have her there. And then 4 weeks ago tomorrow in Tempe, Arizona, I did the Arizona Ironman, and the distances are up there in the time. And so it was just a celebration of life for me that entire day. Just so thankful. And to be able to do it with Allison, it was extra special. So,
Who beat who in that race? Yeah, go ahead and admit it.
Yeah. She was 3 hours faster than I was, so her and Mark are both pretty talented.
I just want to clarify that.
So just real quickly, how has it changed? The most obvious is I did retire in May. I did not go back to work. I did have enough vacation and sick leave. I never used vacation and sick leave, hardly ever, so I had plenty of that and used that up and retired in May of this year. The gratitude, every single day, still to this day, when I wake up, the first thing I do is thank God. There's no other reason why I should be here. Sorry. I can't even read that, Dale.
More balanced life.
Yeah, I think the balance in my life, some of it obviously comes from being retired. I don't wake up in the morning and just immediately go down and eat, rush, go to work. I have just a lot more balance. And then the reflection on what's important to me. Spiritually, my life is stronger than it's ever been. I think 3 years prior, so in October of 2017 is when I took over the position of director. That was, in a lot of ways, very good for me because it required a closer walk with God just to get through each day. But certainly over the last year, it's given me time to reflect on family, on friends, on serving the Lord, on just many different aspects. But certainly this opportunity here today, I remember the first night that I was at Mark and Ellie's house, I called Dale and Lisa and had a wonderful conversation about an hour long. And I remember asking him, why? It's a question that I still can't answer. God is good, and even if I would have been paralyzed, God is still good. even if I would have not survived, God is still good. Why does it happen to some people, not others? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question. But I think in Sabbath school this morning, Holly made a comment about the purpose sometimes that helps us to see God and His work in our lives. And I don't know yet what the purpose of this is. But I think it's well, I don't know.
We do know the purpose. Our purpose is to serve God, right? He gave Dave however many more days, minutes, hours, years he has until God comes back to serve him. And that's what our focus needs to be, in whatever way that we can. Sharing stories with nurses, with doctors, of our belief and trust that I'm here today because of God's goodness in my life. You know, I don't know if you guys, I know the first time I heard these numbers, it stopped me and it took my breath away. 50% death, 50% paralyzation. There's not 100% in, I mean, that equals 100%. There's not, this is not a 1%. I've thought about those numbers a lot, as I'm sure you have. You and I, in our lives, pray to God we will never be faced with a situation like this personally or with a family member. But do you know you are faced with a situation like that every day in our life with Christ? Do we serve Him? Do we follow Him? Do we believe in Him? Because I can give you 100% surety of what happens if you don't. 100% surety. It is death. But I can give you 100% surety of Acts chapter 2 and verse 21. And it shall come to pass that whoever, we are whoever, right? We are the whoever. That is everyone. Calls on the name of the Lord. And you know how the verse ends, right? Shall be saved. 100% surety. If we call. I hope a theme that you've heard in Jill and Dave's story here today is that a relationship with Christ started in, I think it was 2017, that you said you were a director and you dedicated and had to get more close to God to help you through those years as leader of Johnson County. Jill feeling the need of, I got to pray today for some reason right now for something, just something weird. I feel the presence. Our daily relationship with Christ is that vitally important. Would have something else happened to Dave that day if Jill hadn't been praying? We don't know, and it's not ours to know. Ours to know is that our life, minute by minute, moment by moment, are in the hands of God. I've talked about it many times in our church. Why does God heal one and not another? We don't know. It's not my purpose to know. My purpose, and I believe that Dave and Jill are going to agree with this, is to understand we are guaranteed 100% unequivocally whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be healed and saved. That's the healing that's vitally important in all of this. Yeah, I'm glad that Dave completed his marathon in 13 hours, and you got another slide up there that shows the time, because I can't remember it exactly. Whatever it was, I got it on my phone because I screenshotted it. I followed him every half hour. I was checking the Ironman site 4 weeks ago, watching his progress. I was golfing, and I was showing it to my buddies, and my buddies knew Dave's story because I had shared Dave's story with them all year. And the ones that were golfing with me that day, they had interest in what was going on. They couldn't believe it themselves by the grace of God. We don't know. what breath will be our last upon this earth. I can only give you one guarantee in this life. Whoever calls upon the name of the Lord.
It has been interesting that the people that we come in contact with and talk about this and share this, I've had an ability that I haven't had in the past to be able to witness and share God's goodness with people. And so when they say, you know, man, you're lucky, I'm like, I've said this so many times, there's no luck with this. This was God's blessing, and that is all that it was. And I've said that so many times to so many people that I have no idea what their faith is or their religion, it doesn't matter, but it's been able to give me an opportunity. And maybe that's the purpose. That's part of the purpose, is just to share what God has done for me, but what God does for all of us and how good God is for all of us. And I'll continue to share that story. I've met people at the gym that we go to that I've never met before, and they see the scar on my neck and they ask about it, and it gives me an opportunity to share that. The other thing that I wanted to do here in closing, Dale, is thank you for the opportunity for me to come here to personally thank each one of you guys, because I know that Dale shared that with you and that you were praying for me.
And I want to emphasize that too, because it was so comforting to know that there were people all over the U.S. and Canada praying for Dave during his surgery. There were a couple miracles during his surgery. When they were working on his neck, he was face down, and they did not realize that his breathing tube had come out, but his oxygen had maintained at 100%, even though he was not being supplied with oxygen. And the anesthesiologist had to lay underneath him to keep the breathing tube in during surgery. Also, the broken piece in his neck was pushing against his vertebral artery, and so they had an extra trauma team in the emergency room because they were worried that they were going to sever that artery and that he would bleed to death during surgery. And just your prayers, everything just, it is a true miracle that it worked out in the way that it did. So thank you so much for praying and being with us.
Yeah.
God is good. In times of struggles, spiritually, physically, He's a caring God. It has been good to see Him work. I struggle, and I know that Dave kind of alluded to this a little bit, what he said. You know, you share stories like this, and someone else is going to say, yeah, I had a story like that too. It didn't end up that way. You know, why you and not them? Friends, ours is not to question why. Ours to trust and believe in God. Don't let your faith ever be shaken because something didn't get answered the way you want it to be answered. We still have to have faith. We still have to trust because He is a good God. And He does love us. And my part of closing of this, whoever calls, maybe won't be healed, guaranteed will be saved. Anything you want to share in closing?
I just, again, to have a church family, to have good friends that again reached out to the Lord. Mark and Ellie were part of a prayer group down there, and that was one of his first texts to start those prayers in San Antonio as well. So thank you again, each one of you. We know how powerful prayer is. We know how important that is. So thank you.
You know, a week or so after this happened, Jill had to come home for a weekend to get some stuff so she could teach school in San Antonio. And she came home on Friday or Saturday morning or something. We texted her and we invited her over for lunch. We spent 3 or 4 hours together that afternoon, visiting and talking together. So as we close here today, I'm going to make someone really unhappy here. I'm going to ask Lisa to come forward. And Jill and Dave and I are just going to stand here and pray together as we close out our service, and we invite you to stand and pray with us, okay? Father God, you truly are a good God. We truly do thank you for your marvelous, wonderful works in our lives. As we've heard Jill and Dave tell their story, we know it's been a long year. And we see your goodness. And we thank you for that so much. Father, whether Dave is standing here today in front of us or in a wheelchair in front of us or isn't with us, it really doesn't matter if we aren't together like this as friends, as two couples in heaven when you return. That's what matters. So I pray for their friends, I pray for their family, I pray for their Allison and Adam and their spouses. They remain faithful to you. Dedicate their lives to you. Have the desire to follow you in all that they do, so that when you come again and we've called upon your name, we will be saved together. We ask these things, Lord, in your precious and dear name. Amen.
Hymn number 100, Great is Thy Faithfulness. And we'll sing the first and last stanzas. Hymn number 100, Great is Thy Faithfulness.